Rounding out the rest of the goblins, here we've got Goblin Ruinblaster. Pretty straightforward. He comes into play and he blows up a non-basic land. You've always got to have some way to deal with lands in Elder Dragon Highlander because a lot of them are often the best cards on the board. He's great if you can recur him, and he can get pretty annoying. And with haste, he's a pretty good aggressive creature as well. Skirk Prospector, he's really only in this deck as a sack outlet because it's important to have a free way to kill your creatures at any time, and he's going to be a necessary piece to a combo that we'll discuss later. Squee, he's a resilient creature. He comes back every single turn. He's good to have on the board, and the combo with Skull Clamp is pretty obvious. Give you access to a ton of cards every turn. And Kiki-Jiki, you know, there's a ton of stuff you could say about this card. He's easily the best goblin in the deck, and he combos with almost any goblin in the deck. You find a way to combo with him and you'll probably win. He's going to be the first thing you tutor for. He's going to be the thing you want to protect and safeguard as much as you can. And he's also going to be the key combo piece in this deck. And lastly, we're going to take a look at some of the non-goblins which made this deck. Cabal Slaver, as you can see, every time a goblin deals damage to a player, that player discards a card. And because we're going for a blitz strategy, we're going to have a ton of little goblins going in all at once, and this guy's good enough to make someone lose their entire hand all at once, so he's pretty annoying. Next guy here, Moggcatcher, is just awesome. As you can see, he's another tutor guy, and he puts the card right into play. So he's going to be able to cheat the most expensive goblins into play, and he's just going to generate some pretty nasty card advantage. So if your opponent lets this guy stay into play too long, then you'll be able to set up some of your combos really easily. Duplicant, he's just too good. He should belong in every single EDH deck. Anything that lets you remove creatures for good by exiling them is great, and he's also a pretty aggressive creature all on his own, so he's always worth playing. Dimir Houseguard serves a couple purposes. He's great for tutoring, and as you'll see later, he's got a few targets at the 4 casting cost transmute slot. But also, sacrificing a creature, he's a free sack outlet, so he can work as part of a combo as well. Necrotic Ooze, this guy's in the deck for a couple of reasons. One is that he's a combo piece, which we'll discuss later. He's actually part of a 2-card combo that wins the game. But he's also just great all on his own. You can go back and look at some of the goblins in this deck, but there's probably a dozen that have some amazing activated abilities, so Necrotic Ooze can be pretty relevant if he's on the board. Okay, so that's all the creatures in the deck. That's 30 in all. And like I said, we're going for a blitz strategy, and mostly we're trying to get Kiki-Jiki out as fast as possible, because he's going to help combo, he's going to help with the aggro strategy. If he stays on the board, then the opponent's probably screwed. So next I'm going to take a look at all the non-creatures in this deck. So because we're playing a graveyard shenanigans deck, there's obviously a big focus on cards that can bring creatures back into play. This first one here, Torrent of Souls. This one's really good because it sort of benefits both of the main strategies in the deck. First of all, it'll bring a creature back into play, so it is good with graveyards. And then we've got this other ability, it'll give all my creatures +2/+0 in haste. So it's great in a blitz deck. Usually I'll have a ton of goblins into play, and hopefully the goblin I bring back will be a Pyromancer or Piledriver, and I'll probably do a ton of damage when I play this. This next one here, Cauldron Dance. This is going to help me cheat a goblin into play, as well as bring one from my graveyard. And this is sort of a complex card, but usually if you plan it out, you can get a big advantage off of this one. So it's a pretty tricky card, but it'll do some pretty nice effects. Now we have Living Death. This is another card that has mixed results depending on the game state. Early in the game, when the graveyards are pretty empty, this is sort of a pseudo sweeper. You'll just wipe the board, and usually there won't be any creatures in the graveyard. However, later in the game, if people have used sweepers already, then your graveyard's probably full of goblins, and this will be a huge advantage. Get all your goblins back, and sometimes this was great to just sort of pull off a surprise combo win if you have all your pieces in your graveyard. And the same can be said for Patriarch's Bidding. Obviously this is another card that benefits from tribal and graveyard shenanigans, and the only thing I want to say is that sometimes you got to be careful, because usually there'll be a ton of humans in the graveyard and someone will name that, guaranteed. So next I'm going to take a look at some of the removal in the deck. You're always going to need to be able to deal with your opponent's stuff, so it's important to pack some answers for that. Terminate, pretty straightforward, 2 mana, destroy any creature, no drawback. It's pretty efficient and it's worth running. This one, Aftershock, one of the few really good cards in red. It's pretty versatile, getting an artifact, creature, or land, and the drawback is pretty negligible, so this thing is always worth running. Ashes to Ashes. I think people are finally catching on to this card because usually it was didn't see play in a lot of decks, but I think people are realizing how good this thing is. For 3 mana, you're going to kill 2 creatures, and the drawback, again, pretty negligible in EDH. But the important thing with this is that it can actually hit black creatures, which is rare, and it exiles them. So you've got card advantage, and it's very, very good. Grave Pact. This is another card that just sort of fits the theme of the deck. We're going to have lots of goblins dying to sack outlets or other combos or whatever, so this will wipe the board pretty easily. And then up here we've got all of our mass removal effects. Damnation, Decree of Pain, these are both pretty excellent. Decree of Pain especially will generate some massive card advantage, so these are great for killing all the creatures on the board. And then these two I would say are a necessity in a black-red deck because you have no answers to enchantments, and Nevinel's Disc and Oblivion Stone will give you a way to kill those, so I'd say they're pretty important. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about the card draw. Any commander deck needs to have access to a ton of card draw spells, even the aggro ones, just because you need to be able to last into the end game. So the first one here, Sensei's Divining Top. Pretty obvious, it goes into any commander deck. Being able to fix your draws is great, and it's nigh indestructible. This next one here, Skull Clamp, is great in any deck that runs a lot of weenies, and of course this deck generates a lot of goblin tokens and a lot of creatures with 1 toughness. So this will give you at least an extra 2 cards a turn, and it's pretty great. Phyrexian Arena, extra card a turn, pretty straightforward. Promise of Power, 5 cards for 5 mana. You're not going to find many cards as efficient as that. And the option for a demon if you get that much mana, that's great too. Necropotence, if you know what this does, you know why it goes into any black deck. Pretty self-explanatory. It's definitely broken. And this last one, ironically, one of the best card draw spells in the format is red. And Wheel of Fortune is great for any deck that burns through its hand really quickly, and this deck definitely does that. So this will help you restock your hand, probably before your opponents have even had a chance to spend their spells. So usually you're going to get the biggest advantage out of this. So next, the tutors. Like I said before, tutoring gives you access to consistency in a singleton format. These first two here are pretty much staples in any black deck. Vampiric Tutor, Demonic Tutor, cheap and consistent. Next one here, Liliana Vess. You're mostly using her for a second ability here, which will let you tutor your deck for something. The good thing about her in this deck is that you've usually got blockers to be able to protect her, so you might actually get to use her a couple times before she gets nuked off the board. And this last one here, Buried Alive. It's definitely good in any deck that relies on graveyards, but it's especially good with Wort because this general is going to give us access to the goblins we just put in our graveyard with Buried Alive. Some of the best choices, Goblin Pyromancer, the main aggro win condition, Kiki-Jiki, the main combo win condition, and then Squee is always a good choice because it just comes back next turn. So Buried Alive is definitely a gem in this deck. So next we've got the traditional equipment set that goes into most aggro EDH decks. This first one here, Lightning Greaves is awesome in any deck just because haste for free is pretty great, but also Shroud is very important in this deck. It's especially great for something like Kiki-Jiki, which will probably be the main target when it comes out. Umezawa's Jitte, it does everything. It's great in a deck which has a lot of cheap attackers, especially good with something like Warren Instigator, who has Double Strike. It's just really good, it does anything. And these last two, Sword of Light and Shadow, Sword of Fire and Ice. These ones are great, especially because they give us access to some off-color abilities, so we'll have some life gain in a deck that doesn't have any life gain, and we'll have some card draw and some nuking, and some useful protections, which definitely come in handy. These are especially good on Wort, who's unblockable against most decks, so she'll be able to sneak in and get these effects. So these are definitely good. Next we've got the last few cards which don't really fit into any of the previous categories. Mind Twist, the most efficient discard spell. This is great. I especially like this against control decks because usually we don't have an answer to their counter spells, and this will give us a way to preemptively answer their stuff. So this one's pretty good. Profane Command, of course, 4 abilities. It'll always be useful in some way. Especially Fear is surprisingly good in this deck, and it's nice to have a way to sneak in the last bit of damage. Of course, the recursion fits the theme as well, and targeted removal is always useful. And Yawgmoth's Will. Of course, any black deck should be running this, and anyone who has experience with this card knows why. Usually you're going to win if you play this. It's especially great in this deck because there's so many cheap cards, and you can usually cast a bunch of it all in one turn. So this is definitely played in any black deck.